In this tutorial I've aimed to pretty much match the box art, but to pick out a bit more interest on the gold areas. Paint all the areas to be silver with a Leadbelcher. Shade all the darker metallic bits with black Templar. So this would be the metal areas between the joints, the spine, and any of the other exposed metal aside from on the gun. Shade the gun with Nuln Oil. You could probably use Nuln Oil for both these steps. You would just do 2 or 3 coats of Nuln Oil on the other areas, but the black Templar is probably easier and quicker. Highlight the dark metallic areas with an edge highlight of Iron Hand Steel. This is mostly the sharper edges, but where there's any exposed pistons, namely in the legs, I would paint the entirety of the piston cylinder, and in areas like on the hands here to paint a kind of an oval of the silver in the raised area. Highlight the brighter silver areas now with Stormhost Silver. A lot of this can be done just using the side of the brush as edge highlighting, but where there's any scratches or anything like that, just to do fine lines to emphasize these parts. Paint all of the armoured areas on the body with Runelord Brass. This seems to be quite a thin paint in my experience, so it will be 2 thin coats. Of particular note is a lot of these areas are quite smooth, so you don't want any clumping. Paint the brighter silver areas, so namely the head and the shoulder armour with Canoptek Alloy. This is also quite a thin paint, so thin coats will allow for better coverage without any unevenness. Shade the darker areas, so the areas painted Runelord Brass with Cryptek Armourshade gloss. Now this paint is great at tinting the entirety of the metallic areas, but make sure it doesn't collect excessively on the flat surfaces, so wick away any areas that pool. On the chest plate and any areas where there's kind of battle damage, just make sure this collects in the recesses. When it comes to the brighter areas, you could go ahead and paint the entirety of them with just a wash of the same paint. However, this would then need to correct with a further layer of Canoptek Alloy over all the raised areas. I actually found it was probably quicker just to do a recess shading of this For the face, it's just to pick out the details, and on the actual shoulder armour, it's anywhere there's an obvious crack or a crease. This takes a little bit of time, but then you don't need to do any clean-up step with the Canoptek Alloy. On the box art, the dark armoured areas transition to a lighter metallic colour at their edges. To complete this, paint the extreme edges with Canoptek Alloy, and then using thinner paint or even just pure water, pull this then in constant motions towards the highest area. But what this allows for is to give a more smooth gradient to the paint. On the more horizontal areas, like on the arm here, I would paint a strip of this at the highest point, and then using a clean water brush to pull it in the same direction as the highlight so that there's a smooth transition. Then picking out all the sharp areas with pure Canoptek Alloy. Also at this point to pick out the edges of any of the battle damage to give it a kind of a sharp edge, or the appearance of a sharp edge. Also, I went ahead and highlighted the brighter metallic areas of the Canoptek Alloy with Stormhost Silver, but this isn't really a noticeable change in colour, so you don't necessarily need to do it. It probably won't make a huge difference. Paint the recessed ribs with ISRC. Paint the gold areas with Retributor Armour. So in this model, it's both the necklace and the central chest symbol, but also the, I think, armoured sheeting, or the bits on the side. No idea what they're called, but you're painting gold anyway, why not? Shade all the gold areas with Guilliman Flesh contrast, making sure to use enough of the contrast paint so that it settles into the deeper recesses. Again, to match the box art, the central symbol has a black surround the Necron symbol. You could paint this with something like Abaddon Black, but Black Templar kind of flows into the recesses better, and 2 coats should cover it completely. Edge highlight all the gold areas with Liberator Gold, picking out the sharp edges with the edge of the brush. Paint all the areas to be either black or green with Abaddon Black. So in this case it would be the gun and the middle cable running from the backpack to the gun. start the green glowing areas, first paint with a layer of Caliban Green. So this is the coils at the base of the weapon, the round areas along the barrels, and the cabling. Note that when you're painting that first layer on the gun glowy bits, let some of it flow over the edge to start the edge highlight effect, so just to make sure that this area is also covered with a layer of Caliban Green. And the central circles in the gold areas to pick out with Caliban Green as well. First highlight for the green areas is Warpstone Glow. So for the power pack or the power coils, pick out most of them, just allow the bits at the extreme edges to remain the Caliban Green, the barrel of the gun to pick out the centre orbs, and a thin edge highlight around them with the Warpstone Glow. And then onto the cables just to pick out most of them, but leave again some of the Caliban in the deeper, or not so much the deeper recesses, but the areas where it meets the gun. Also now paint the lower left third of the circles with Warpstone Glow as well. The second highlighting is with Moot Green, and again that's for all intents doing the same as before but covering a smaller area. So in this, picking out that kind of middle ridge of the coils for the gun barrels to pick out a smaller area on the globes and a thinner edge highlight all around. The cabling then pick out the more central areas. Pick out a smaller area, again the lower left side of the circles with Moot Green, avoiding as best you can to spill onto the golds, but I've done that in a few places and to be honest it isn't all that noticeable. And for a final highlight, pick out the extreme edges of the plasma coils, the dotted centre of the globes, and small dots, as you'll see now, where the edges of the gun corners are, pretty much like a dot highlight, but really does add to the glowing effect. Note, I didn't use this colour on any of the big cabling, as I think the Moot Green brings it up bright enough without being too vibrant. Adventurous, put small dots at the extreme bottom left corner of the circles, while a tiny area, the yellow at the end of a green highlighting run, really does add to the effect. Sell the kind of pearl-like effect or the round-like effect on these areas. Pick out the top right corner with tiny dots of white scar. I suppose the way of painting these is very similar to how you paint an eye lens, and as you see, a singular dot can really emphasize kind of the impression of 3 dimensions. Paint the central part of the head, as per the box art, first with a base layer of Corax White. Aid the recess, or in this case I suppose the dent in the white areas with watered down Mechanica Standard Grey. Stage, you can, if you'd like, edge highlight the areas with white scar, but it isn't all that noticeable once dry, so it's maybe not the most necessary step. just to give the impression of edge highlighting. You remember you forgot to do the eyes, pick them out in a succession of first Warpstone Glow, and then to pick out if you can a smaller area with Moot Green, and finally dot the very centre of the eyes with Yriel Yellow. Edge highlight the black areas first with Eshin Grey, and as always trying to catch as many of the sharp edges with the side of the brush, because it just makes things easier and quicker and also gives a very nice clean finish to things. Also paint the edges of any dents in the black areas also with Eshin Grey to emphasise the battle damage. Pick out then the corners of these areas with small amounts of Administratum Grey. Don't do too much of this or it ends up looking kind of quite bright, but just to pick out the sharpest edges as a second highlight on the black. And this is the finished result. If you like this video, please check out the channel where there's numerous other Warhammer and non-Warhammer videos, and if you do enjoy the content, please consider subscribing.